Meeting's called to order. Let's start with discussion item A, which is the fiscal year 2019-20 audit.
And we have the representatives here from Plant Moran to go over that presentation.
All right, great. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Cheryl. Great to see everybody, even though it's over Zoom, but it's still good to see all your faces. We did want to cover today the results of the audit for the June 30th, 2020 audit for the city. Just to kind of give a little bit of background, we did spend this year approximately 275 hours auditing the books and records of the city. And we did perform the entire audit remotely this year. So did want to, again, say a special thanks to Cheryl, Pam, and their team. Really without them, we definitely would not have been able to get through this audit, and definitely not remotely. So we do appreciate all the professionalism that we received and all the hard work that was put in by your team to allow us to be presenting here today, really in the exact same time frame as we have in the past. So we did our audit at the very end of August, and we're here today in mid-October to present the results. So did just want to say we do have a couple of things you should have in your packet. The end of audit letter, that's kind of the smaller report, maybe only a few pages. And then also the financial statements. And then just as we have in past years, we do have the graph presentation to go through with you as a summarized format of the financial statements instead of going through the financial statements in all its detail and glory, because they just keep getting longer here every year. So, and we did want to just make a general note. We do want to commend your team. We do continue to see improvements in your internal processes, and really probably one of the other things that I've really noticed over the last couple of years is just the great teamwork that your management team has, and the way that they really work well together. And I'm sure as council, you see that as well, and can appreciate what the difference that makes when you have a team that works well together. And so just wanted to make a general overall comment that we've noticed those improvements internally, and wanted to recognize your team for that. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Aaron, and he's going to talk about the results of the audit.
Thanks, Pam. So we are going to start through and talk through some of the financial results for the fiscal year, and I am going to share my screen while we walk through these. All right, let me see if this works. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So we'll start out here with our first graph. And this chart here shows the past 4 fiscal years governmental fund revenues, starting with fiscal year 2017 on the left through fiscal year 2020. And the city's governmental funds consist of the general fund, the major and local street funds, and the capital projects fund. Overall, the city's revenue has remained fairly consistent for the past 4 years, rising from 4.6 million in 2017 to 4.8 million in 2020. And property taxes remains the city's largest revenue source and has continued to increase each year as taxable values throughout the city have increased each year for the last 4 years. There was a slight decrease in overall revenue from fiscal year 19 to fiscal year 20, and that was a result of decreased rental revenue due to the coronavirus pandemic and decreased building fee revenue due to less construction activity in fiscal year 20 compared to fiscal year 19.
And then I do believe, Aaron, too, if you just go back one really quick, because this will be important just for the city to watch as you continue to go forward. Your second largest revenue source is the federal and state line, and that is your state shared revenue and your Act 51 monies that are both dependent on sales tax collections. And then also on the state shared revenue, a portion of that is dependent on the state's budget, right? So, which is kind of the cut that you saw this year in order to help balance their budget. They did some different things with the statutory piece, and that reduced your August payment that usually gets booked back into June. And that's really where you're seeing the drop there this year. So that's really going to be important to watch as you move forward in 2021 fiscal year that you're in right now.
Yes, definitely. Thanks, Pam. So we just talked about the governmental fund revenues. So I wanted to touch on the governmental fund expenditures for those same four funds, which is what this chart shows. Overall expenses have remained consistent in total from year to year. And public safety does remain the city's largest expense category, with substantially all expenses consisting of wages and benefits for our policemen, as well as amounts paid to the city of Southfield for fire protection. Looking at 2019 to 2020, public works was down slightly, went from $1,045,000 to $968,000. That was mainly due to decreased road maintenance. And then public safety was up slightly. That was due to having a full police force for the entire year in 2020 compared to 2019. Overall, if we took the total revenue on the previous page minus the expenditures here, we would have a net increase of $37,000 for the year.
So my question is, when I was looking at this earlier, I see that there was a decrease from 19, well, actually a decrease from 19, let's just leave it at 19. But there's only two, besides public safety, there's two that there's an increase of over $20,000 for one and about $40,000 for the other, and that's for administration and for recreation. So I know that I think in 2019 we might have stopped doing the farmers market, but even though I think the farmers market stopped in 18, I think, but for this to be starting in COVID, administration I can understand maybe, because what I read later into the report is that we're paying for some COVID type things, but I don't understand the recreation and culture.
The recreation and culture, off the top of my head, I don't 100% know the increase. I don't know if Pam Bratchie would know that one off the top of her head.
Not off the top of my head. I
Okay.
can look, but I don't remember exactly off the top of my head. I'll look it up.
Could it be that we didn't have a recreation, person in place in 19 for the full year? I don't remember when Chris came aboard.
We
We have more.
That's what I was thinking as well.
Yeah, he came aboard in April, I think, so around there.
Mm-hmm.
So a full year of
For a full year of
having
Park
that
and
person.
Rec, yeah.
Yes, that would make sense. When I quickly pulled up the detail of what makes up that category, and the largest change was our salary expenses increased. They were $20,000 in 2019 compared to $32,000 of salary expenses in 2020. So that would be 12,000 of the increase.
And farmer's market is not taken out of that account, Kelly.
Yeah,
Parks
it's
and Rec.
got a DDA, right?
Correct.
So so $12,000 is because of salaries. What else made it go up?
So there was an additional 4,000 of employee taxes and benefits, presumably for the same employee.
Okay.
And then we had an additional $3,000 of community event spending as well.
In 20.
In 20 compared to 19, yes. Any other comments or questions on governmental fund expenditures?
No, not right now.
Okay. All right. This next table shows the city's total taxable value. And when we were talking on the city's revenue slide, I mentioned property taxes has been the city's largest source of tax revenue. This chart shows the city's taxable value since 2008 until now, as well as the projected taxable values for the city into the future. And the reason why we show that this chart is that taxable value is one of the main drivers in the tax revenue the city recognizes. Under Proposal A, which was passed back in the 1990s, taxable values for capped properties can only increase each year by the lesser of inflation or 5%. So any homeowner that would have lived in the city in fiscal year 19 and remained in the city in fiscal year 20, their taxable value of their property, or their tax bill essentially, wouldn't increase more than 5% if everything else remained consistent for the year. And that's usually the case. When a property sells, then the property's taxable value can increase, but traditionally, the amount of property selling is for the whole city is not a huge portion of the city's properties. So as you can see, in 2008 and 2009, the city's taxable value was $189 million. And when the housing market collapsed, the taxable values decreased with that to a low point in 2015 of 117 million. Since then, the taxable values have increased to around 145 million, but those taxable values still have a bit of a way to go to reach even the historical amounts. And to kind of put this another way, if the city's taxable value had stayed flat since 2009, this year alone, the city would have had a projected additional 900,000 in tax revenue this year. So this just kind of goes to show that the city has had to either look for additional sources of revenue or change how services are provided or cut costs to deal with the shortfall in revenue the city has experienced due to a declining taxable value.
Hey, Aaron.
Yes.
So the market crash hit in 2008. When were we at our maximum taxable value? I know there would have been a delay, but for it to hit and take effect. But so the graph starts at 2009. If we started the graph at 2007, would that line on the left essentially be up higher than 190,000?
It could be. This is for fiscal year 2009, which would be 2008 to 2009. So presumably, I don't know 100% the figures for the previous fiscal year, but presumably that would include kind of the pre-collapse amounts, since it would have been as of July 1st of 2008.
Yeah,
The assessments would have been as of 2007. So they definitely would have been before the hit there, because there's an almost 2-year lag.
Yeah, I guess, is it possible to get a update of this graph with it going back a couple of years?
Sure.
Yeah, I would love to see it.
This is likely the high point, because it would be based on 2007 values before the hit, but we can show you leading into that. We can go back further and pull it. Yeah,
because that would be helpful for when I'm explaining, Prop A to residents, which I do a lot.
Sure.
And I talk about the high point being in 2007 before the market crash hit. So if it's not too much trouble.
No problem.
Okay. So Pam briefly touched on this, but the city's second largest source of revenue is the state revenue sharing that the city gets from the state of Michigan. And there's two pieces to that. There's a constitutional revenue sharing, which is based on the historical 4% income tax before it was increased to 6%. And then there's the statutory revenue sharing, which is based on the state's budgeting processes. So on the left-hand side here, back in 2001, statutory revenue sharing was kind of at its high point. And so the bar across the top represents, if the state would have kept the city's statutory revenue sharing consistent through until now, the city would have received roughly $515,000 a year. Instead, the state did cut the statutory revenue sharing, which impacted the city's revenue it recognized. And so the line on the bottom represents the actual amounts the city received over the years, and cumulatively to date, that was an additional $2.5 million that the city did not receive due to the state's budgetary cuts. So we wanted to show this to kind of show the impact of it for the last 20 years, as well as keep this top of mind as the city evaluates potential impacts due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The state could have potential cuts to revenue sharing, and this could play an even bigger role in future financial decisions. Next, this chart shows the historical unassigned and assigned fund balance of the general fund for the past 4 years as a percentage of the total annual expenditures. And for your reference, unassigned and assigned fund balance represents the true resources on hand that would be available to be spent after paying all short-term liabilities from the general fund. So essentially, the city's general fund has $1.5 million of resources available at year end. Now, this does not consider anything of a long-term nature, such as long-term debt or pension or retiree healthcare liabilities. So as a percentage of annual expenditures, in 2020, the general fund's annual expenses was 3.8 million. The unassigned and assigned fund balance was 1.5 million. So for example, if the city were to lose all sources of revenue funding, you would make it about 40% of the year or through, October or November before the money ran out, if that makes sense. Next, this chart shows the city's pension and Opeb liabilities. If we start on the left, this pie chart shows the city's total pension liability as of December 31st, 2019, and it's measured on just a calendar year basis as the city participates in the Municipal Employees Retirement System of Michigan, also known as MERS. The total pension liability number at the top of $8.3 million represents the actuarially computed future value of pension benefits that have been promised to both retirees and current active employees in the city's pension plan. The amounts then in blue of $6.2 million are the physical assets that have been set aside by the city to help pay for these benefits. And the unfunded portion of the liability would be the difference between the total pension liability of $8.3 million and the plan assets of $6.2 million. That's the amount that is reported on the city's statement of net position as a liability. On the right side, we have the city's total Opeb liability. Opeb stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. And for the city, that represents retiree healthcare costs that have been promised to current retirees and current actives in the Other Post-Employment Benefit Plan. As of the end of the year, the city had not yet set aside funds towards this liability, so the total balance is recorded as a liability on the city's statement of net position. These are both the total pension liability and the total Opeb liability. They are computed by an actuary. So the city isn't necessarily going to have to go out and pay this money all, tomorrow, but it is a large number that will be repaid over the years. For reference, the amount of retiree healthcare costs for this past fiscal year was roughly $150,000. But the total number is the expected future amount to pay for both retirees and active employees in the plan that still have yet to retire and be in the plan. Right. Finally, we did want to.
I'm sorry. So at the bottom of it says $50,000 OPEB contribution will be reflected in the next valuation. So, because and correct me if I'm wrong, I thought we were contributing to it, right?
We did contribute to it, but it did not get in there in time for this year.
That's what
So we did get the 50,000, but it came in after the end of the fiscal year.
No problem.
Yeah, you might remember we were going to put 150,000 in, but we cut that, at the end of the year because of budget issues.
Correct.
Yep. So for the COVID-19 pandemic, these are some key points to keep in mind. you know, there has been some lost revenue to date, primarily with the community room rentals that the city has due to, you know, having the state being locked down in the current situation we're all in. The state did cut the August state shared revenue for the statutory portion of that payment, and then permanent revenue has experienced a bit of a decline as well. The city did incur some unanticipated COVID-19 related expenses. However, from our discussions with city management, most have been on supplies and sanitation expenses and have not been overall very significant. As the city looks forward into the current fiscal year, into the future, there could be continued disruption or declines to revenue streams from a variety of sources from when the state balances its budget. Sales tax revenue at a statewide level could continue to be volatile, which will in turn impact both state shared revenue and Act 51 revenues. And as local communities manage safety and accessibility of public facilities, these are all doubts and concerns that cities across the state will have to manage. As of this point, the impact on property tax values is still unknown. Any impact would be experienced in budget years subsequent to fiscal year 2021. The city, as we did cover, there is a bit of discretionary fund balance to absorb some revenue shortfalls, but the ability to do that would be limited and could not be sustained over time. So as a result of all this, it will be very important to develop financial projections and to revisit and adjust those regularly as the city embarks in these uncertain times.
Hey, Aaron, if I could just add kind of one high level comment, just kind of to the end, just to give council maybe a little perspective just on the year as a whole. I think the city ended up, given the budget challenges, the city still ended the year, I think in a good financial position, which is going to be key as you head into kind of some of these uncertainties. And, you continue to have very good budgeting practices, which is very key in times where your revenue sources are uncertain. So, encourage you to continue to follow those, monitor the budget the way I know your team and the council itself is already doing. And really your budget was pretty much almost spot on within like $500 of your original budget that you passed back almost a year ago. So honestly, I've been doing this over 20 years. I've never seen a budget that close to the original budget in my life. So, but I think that's a testament to all the hard work your team has done. And when the revenues were reduced, it's the response that council and management had to control those expenditures and leave you in a position at the end of the year that is still strong heading into kind of some of these uncertain times. So I think you should feel good about where you ended 20, and it's positioned you well. And I know you may need to make some tough choices, but we don't really, as Aaron pointed out, with property tax revenues, you're definitely not going to see any changes in 2021 to that. And that's your largest source of revenue. So, keep watching, but the housing market is still pretty strong. So if it ends that way in December, I wouldn't foresee any impact in 2022 either. So just continue to monitor it, continue to keep an eye on it, which I know your team's doing. And obviously we're here to help in any way we can if it's needed. Does anyone have any questions on the graphs in general before we walk through the letter? Nope. Okay, there was one thing I forgot to add. The financial statements, although we didn't go over them in detail, we did forget to mention that we did provide an unmodified opinion, which is the highest level of assurance that the city can receive. So you can rely on the statements as they are presented within your packet. And then I believe Alicia is going to cover the end of audit letter.
Well, thank you, Pam, and good evening, everyone. I believe the council members all have, and the mayor have the letter, received a copy of the letter in your packet, and maybe we could just walk through it together. It really has 3 letters in one. And I'm mostly going to focus on the first letter and the third letter. That's really the bulk of the content. So the first letter really has any items that we identify to be internal control deficiencies are required to be reported in this first letter. So we identified 2 instances where we had internal control deficiencies that sort of rose to the level of reporting to the governing body. The first has to do with bank reconciliations and segregation of duties. So in general, and this would not be a new conversation for the city, because in general, when you have a small operation with limited staff, it's very difficult to fully segregate responsibilities and not have folks doing duties that we'd consider to be incompatible from a risk perspective, because everyone needs to wear different hats when you have few people. What it means, though, is that the controls that are in place to sort of manage that risk are really important. And so anytime you have a lapse in those controls, it sort of elevates the risk over cash reporting and handling. And so we did identify a couple of instances in which I would call sort of lapse in the controls that you do have in place, because you do have them. They just didn't work entirely for you in these 2 instances. So the first is that for one of your bank accounts, although all the bank accounts were reconciled timely every month as we would expect, for one account there was an unreconciled difference that was carried over for a few months rather, so April, May, and June. And we identified it during the audit. Your team investigated and realized that revenue and cash needed to be recorded and reflected in the financial statements, and that was done and corrected. The takeaway from that, we would say, is to the extent that you have unreconciled differences that carry over month to month, you want to make sure either at the preparer level or at the reviewer level that you sort of drill down into those, investigate them, and get them corrected as soon as possible. In this instance, it was a few months. Going forward, maybe if you see that an unreconciled item carried over, a second month in a row, I think that'd be a good clue to go ahead and investigate and get that recorded. The other item that we noted is that in the past, oh, sure.
So the $138,000 that was uncovered in that example, does that, did I read that right? So does that actually mean that we have $138,000 more on cash at the end of the fiscal year than we thought we did?
Then was reflected in the general ledger. That's correct.
Right. So then our year essentially, we ended up if I remember correctly, we ended up in the hole. I think it was $305,000 that we had to dip into the general fund to get things to balance. So that basically means that we were really only in the hole by about 170, 160, right?
So I think the 305 was in accordance with your amended budget. You anticipated that you were going to need that additional 3 to balance your budget, but it turned out that you didn't need all that, and you actually just about broke even by the end of the year. So as of June 30, you didn't use most of that 300, and including that 140, bringing that 140 in certainly helped you to get there.
Got it. Okay, and so that answers my other question later on in the financial statements. I couldn't understand why we were only $270 off when we were $300,000 off before.
That would be why. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Sure. The other item, when we talk about the importance of the mitigating controls or compensating controls in place over cash handling and reporting, is that one of the processes the city has implemented over the years is a month-over-month review of any new vendors added to the system. It's a great control to have. We did note that, with the pandemic and, just other staffing constraints, that wasn't done for a few months in a row. And so that sort of heightens the risk if we combine the fact that there was an unreconciled difference and we didn't have anyone kind of checking as timely as we'd like to see any new vendors. It sort of heightens the risk in totality. So we do have a few takeaways there that we've discussed with the management team, and I think those items are already being addressed as we understand. The second item is on the next page 3, and it has to do with water and sewer utility billing. We understand this has recurred a couple of times in recent years. And so we did identify an error again this year with rates in the system. So what happened this year is a little bit different than what's happened in the past year. Many of the standard rates were updated. It was the rate for minimum billings that weren't updated from the prior year rate. And so anyone who was getting that minimum bill was in fact charged the 2019 versus the 2020 rate. So cumulatively, in the few years that we've seen this error, it's been a cumulative error about $10,000 of lost revenue. So we're not talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. Cumulatively, it's only been $10,000, but still something that obviously we want to correct. And what we think it really comes down to is not having a process in place to update the rates. There is a process in place. There is somebody assigned to do that. It's really the monitoring or the review to verifying that those rates, that they were saved properly, that every rate component was in fact updated. So it's sort of auditing or reviewing what's being done on the user end there. And we think that should get you there and identifying internally if there's any lapse in getting those rates updated.
And would it make sense to have somebody different, somebody different from who actually originally enters the rates to do an audit of it, a certain time period afterwards so that this doesn't happen again?
Absolutely. Yeah, we would absolutely recommend that a person independent of the preparer or data entry person review them. Any questions or comments on those two findings before we move on?
And Cheryl, we're going to identify somebody to set that up for ongoing. You're on mute, but I read your lips. Thank you.
I saw the nod.
Yes.
Great. The second letter is really just pretty standard. It's similar language to what we've had in the past, and it's really just to let the mayor and council know that we haven't deviated from our audit plan and didn't have any significant issues or differences with management. On page 4, we are required to tell you about significant estimates, including your financial statements. Those really haven't changed. It's mostly pension and retiree healthcare, as we've already talked about in terms of the sensitive estimates affecting the city's financial statements. And then on page 5 of that letter, again, you'll see partway through that because it is technically a separate letter, we're required to communicate if there were any adjustments that were identified by our team. And we just noted that same item from section 1. So nothing additional besides that we identified. Section 3. These are really just other informational items that we wanted to bring to your attention. They are not internal control deficiencies. They're just observations that we made around operations that we wanted to discuss with the governing body. So the first is just around interfund transactions and ensuring that to the extent that there's loans between funds, those are getting cleared out and sort of paid back timely. Typically doing that either quarterly or at year end is a good best practice, unless it's a longer term loan and structured that way. Water loss, this is another area that has been an ongoing area of communication over the past few years in our audit report. And so, the water loss for the city is incredibly significant. Just to be candid, and we wanted to demonstrate that here, or kind of what that's meant in dollars to have water loss at 35, 38, 40%, and what that means in dollars. So really what it means is 35 to 40% of water units being purchased by the city are not being billed back out to residents, and rather you're incurring that cost as part of the overall system costs rather than through direct billings. And so there are a host of reasons why this could be occurring, and we know that Cheryl and Pam have been really working hard to try to identify what's happening there. We would just really encourage you to kind of stick with that and really try to figure out what's going on here so that we can see this loss come down and get those dollars back in the system. Cheryl, were you gonna add something? I saw you went off mute.
Oh, not at this point. We
Okay.
did have the one inspection of various places where we thought there were water losses to have those addressed. But there's still obviously a loss occurring somewhere in the system. So we're trying to work with SACWA and whoever else to try to identify what those are so they can be addressed.
Yeah, and one of the other recommendations we had to Cheryl and Pam in the meantime is to continue to monitor this on a monthly basis And so you can see if, let's say you fix one water main. Okay, did that have an impact? And if it did, was it this large of an impact or was it just a small impact? So then you might know that there's something else still wrong, because it could be a whole bunch of things, smaller things working together, or it could be something really large. But in a more mature community like yours, having a 15-ish and maybe even to 20% water loss we see, but 40%, there's definitely something else going on within the system.
Thank you, Pam.
Cheryl, did we ever find out, or were we ever able to find out whether or not there was a big effect from the, I can't remember the street, I think it was Rackham where the Phragmites were, where we found that big leak?
Yeah,
Did that have an effect?
That one was addressed. So
Oh,
that
I know it was addressed, but did we ever find out whether or not it was a big contribution to the amount of water loss?
it has not, from what we're seeing right now, it has not really impacted our water loss.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Because I do think the first 2 years we talked about it, there was always something like there was a couple really big fires, or there was a big water main break. And so, it was always like, well, maybe it's something else, well, it was probably that, but then the next year, it came back and it was still, and that's why I really recommend looking at it on a monthly basis. To your point, Bruce, like if there is something that happens, then you should see that peak in the 1 month, but then it should kind of go away on a monthly basis. So definitely something to continue to watch, and to really force Aqua to dig into it with you and get this resolved, because it's just, it's been going on for quite a few years now. So, maybe as you continue to work with them, I think trying to get them to understand the importance to the system is going to be key.
I was going to ask, is it possible to get a report from Southfield Fire Department on the number of units that they're utilizing for fire suppression and just hydrant maintenance, things like that?
I would definitely guess that you could request that. Just given the size of the community, that big of a loss for that long of a period of time is likely not due to that. But to your point, Scott, especially if they're doing it, every quarter or something, if you're tracking it monthly, you'd be able to kind of see those little spikes if that's what it was. But I do think it's, it's worth asking. You definitely could ask.
Maybe they're filling up their trucks at our hydrant or something. She's not telling us.
You know what? Anything's possible at this point. So no idea is a bad idea in the quest to try to figure out what the heck is going on.
And I don't know that if they're able to meter the units coming from the hydrants, but certainly they would know the area if it's sort of in Lathrup versus in Southfield, I would think at a minimum.
Yeah, even just an estimate, because that is a significant, 40%, that we would see craters in the city if that were broken water mains. It's a lot of water to be unaccounted for.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
But then it also gets into like the mechanics of the system, like are the meter reads working properly, either, with the end users or with SOCWA, like what sort of things mechanically could be going wrong in the system if it's not due to water loss? Because I think that's a great point, that you would be hard to hide that much of water loss over 3 years if it was a leak, a main issue. So.
But it could also be their meter. We've talked about that before, and that was an issue. And I'm sure several council members may remember. Pam, I'm sure you remember. This was an issue many, many years back at the city, and it was a meter issue. And Pam, I think it was a meter on SOCWA's side that was reading
out of the city. Yep.
Exactly. So it could also be a meter issue or many meters. So, really, it could be a lot of different things. And I think that's where part of the challenge is.
And we have asked Aqua to look into that, haven't we, Cheryl?
Well, how did we address it when we discovered it was a meter issue in the past? Did we just submit a letter? Did we talk to someone that was in charge of that? I know
talked to
we
Sakura.
corrected one of them, but
Sakura, they went out and checked their meters and they found one was not reading.
Yeah, it would seem like that might be something that, given our issue, that we might want to request them to do on an annual basis or whatever frequency to make sure that
yeah.
the meter that they're reading from in terms of our total units purchased is accurate.
Right. I would agree with that. I mean, even if we could do it quarterly, that would work. Especially now. I mean, we're near 40%. I would, yeah.
We have talked to them about reading the meter or going out to the meters. From my understanding, and Cheryl can correct me if I'm wrong, the ones going out of the city, they said were correct, I think, but there's one that's on the Southfield side that they were still going to look into. So that's the only thing that because I've been working with them on this for months now, on the meter side of it.
So Pam is correct. The other possibility is that we have aging meters in everyone's home and maybe they are not registering correctly the amount of water going into each unit. So we'll have to look at if those need to be regulated or replaced. I strongly suspect we may be looking at a replacement system in the near future.
Okay. On page 7 of the letter, there's a few other sort of recommendations, mostly just related to best practices that we've already covered with the team. In the interest of time, I don't know what else is on the agenda or what other topics council and the mayor want to cover tonight, but we're happy to just leave these with you for reference and don't necessarily need to go over them. We've already talked about really the last item, which I think would be the most important, the financial outlook and kind of doing some forward planning. Erin already covered that.
I'm a little concerned about the information technology control. So if I'm reading this right, you're saying once somebody quits or is let go, that we are not making sure that all of our internal information technology is not locked down. Did I read that right?
There's not a formal process to review user access sort of after the fact. Not that you don't have a process for removing them from the system or kind of going through the termination procedures, but that a best practice would be that you would then have quarterly or monthly, whatever frequency you deem to be appropriate, user access reviews in the system just to ensure that everything went as intended with terminated employees, but also with make sure nobody that's currently active is not accessing things they're not supposed to.
If I could address that in part, we do have a system in place on an individual basis. So when someone is hired, they're given a form that identifies all of their sign-ons and if they've been issued a pass to get into the building and credit cards, all of that. So when they are separating from the city, then that form is then updated to make certain that all of those things are returned as well as that their access codes are canceled. What they're referring to is there's not a double check. So there's quarterly, we're not making certain that employee A is indeed no longer in the system. But we do have something on a case-by-case basis in place.
Okay.
Any other items on page 7 that we wanted to discuss? Okay. And then the rest of the letter are really just legislative items, updates that we wanted to leave your team with, and accounting pronouncements that will be coming into play here in the next couple of years. Nothing really critical there, but we just wanted those available to you for reference. So that really covers the bulk of the audit results, our comments or communication to the governing body. I'm certainly happy to cover anything else that you'd like or that you didn't hear us discuss this evening.
Well, I am good. I appreciate it, as always.
Absolutely.
Oh, we're good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I could just, one quick question. So for the meeting at 7 o'clock, would you want us to basically just cover the graphs. Do you want us to go through the letter again? I mean, I know we've pretty much covered it with this team, and we're not required to do it at 7. So I just want to make sure that we're utilizing your time in the most appropriate way.
I think we can go through the graphs, and that's more than enough.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Moving on to discussion item B, Construction Board of Appeals, Building Board of Appeals. Thank you, Plant Moran.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thank you. Really
Thank you.
appreciate it. Plant
You're
Moran.
welcome.
Aaron,
Thank
thanks.
you. See you soon.
All right, see you.
So if you recall, we had previous discussions that we do not have the Construction Board of Appeals, which would also serve as the Building Board of Appeals in place or appointed here in the city of Lathrup Village. So one of the mechanisms that is permitted is that you can share an existing board, and the city of Novi, thank you, Scott, for making that connection, has indicated they were receptive to us sharing their board. So what you will have in your packet for the council meeting is a motion to actually put that in place along with the fees associated with going before the Construction Board of Appeals.
Okay.
Can I ask a question about that, Cheryl?
Yeah.
I want to make sure I'm not on mute. Yeah, okay. So in terms of the application fee, I just want to make sure, because it showed in the document that was in there, it showed that our application fee is $400, and then it said Novi's application fee is $300. So if one of our residents is applying, they're just going to pay the $400?
Correct.
And then is there any type of financial arrangement between us and the city of Novi? Do they do this, gratis, or do we have to pay them for this? Do we pay them for each occurrence? And if so, what's that arrangement?
That I don't have that answer right now. My understanding is that the board members are paid per meeting for their services. I anticipate that the city would be responsible for paying them the rate that they're customarily used to charging the city of Novi. I think that cost is primarily inclusive in the application fee. But yeah, so we have had a request for an appeal to the Board of Construction Appeals, but it is premature at this point. So this is more of we're going to be ready to go in the event that request ripens and it's necessary to activate this board.
Thanks.
Any other questions regarding that? Next, we have marijuana licensing and application process.
So I met, Jill and I met last week. We have very rough draft of the ordinance. We should have something for the Planning Commission. We still haven't had an opportunity to get the feedback directly from the Planning Commission. That's one of the things that's up for tomorrow night. So we should have that. They will probably see that rough ordinance tomorrow, plus get their input on the zoning. And then I would anticipate by council's next study session, you'll also see that information. So still moving forward with that process.
Thank you.
Same thing with this, sorry, I skipped it.
No, go ahead, because
I was gonna say, sign ordinance is in the same conversation. It'll be discussed at the Planning Commission tomorrow night. Jill and I have talked about it. There's a not as rough draft of the sign ordinance that they will see. So
okay. So that was E. Let's skip back to infrastructure committee update.
Yeah, nothing much to update. I mean, we had 2 town halls. The attendance was way lighter than I expected or would have liked. It's been absolute crickets on the proposal, so I have no idea what people are thinking, whether they're for it, against it, one way or the other, big one way or the other. I have no idea. But we do have 2 more town halls scheduled. The next one is this Thursday at 7:30. And then the following one is November 1st, I believe, at 3, I think. I think that's a Sunday, but I definitely know the next one is Thursday at 7:30.
Okay, thank you. House in the Woods update.
I've made an inquiry to a couple of appraisers to get their quotes, so waiting to hear back.
Did they have a expected date that they're gonna get back with you, or you just not reached out to them?
I just reached out to them. I asked them to get back in the next 2 weeks.
Okay. All right, any council comments? You have 8 minutes.
Yeah, what's the status on fine art and jewelry?
I spoke with DiMaggio. He was going to be taking that down when I talked to him. That was 2 weeks ago.
Okay. Can we get a confirmation that it's down? I don't know if Bruce is checking right now.
I can try to find it and check. It took me a little while to find it last time, but I'll check.
Okay.
And he also indicated he's probably within a month he'll be out of the city too, so into his new location for what it's worth.
All right. Thank you.
All right, just I have a couple questions. I know Cheryl, you probably haven't a chance to work on these given the personal events of the past, but I'm going to just bring them up anyway so that they stay active. One, at the last meeting we talked about looking into a road asset management plan so that we can have more freedom in our Act 51 monies. I did see a little information on that online, and it does look like the majority of that road asset plan is just having PASER ratings, and we just updated our PASER ratings, so we're probably, most of the way there. So just want to make sure that stays on the plate, and also just wanted to see if we've moved forward at all, and I'm guessing we haven't, again, because of the obvious, but on the code enforcement officer hire.
No, we haven't at the present time. I did ask Kelda to check with the professional group for code enforcement to again put out a feeler there.
Excellent. Okay. And then with the packet tonight, I noticed that there was not the expenditure report. The one where the line by line item expenses. It wasn't in there. There was the one. There was the one with the that shows the percentage of budget, which is similar, but the actual expenditures wasn't on there.
You're on mute, Pam.
I'll check and see if it's on my computer and I'll send an email if it is.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thanks. That's all I had.
Great. Anybody else? Got 6 minutes.
I guess we can give you just an update quickly on the amendments to the Open Meeting Act and what that means from a practical standpoint going forward for these meetings. Basically, from between now and the end of 2020, we can continue to hold virtual meetings for any reason whatsoever. The real impact, everything we've been doing in accordance with what is now required under the Open Meetings Act. So from that standpoint, I think we are set up pretty well. The only real difference that is going to be at the beginning of the meetings, each council member is going to be required to identify themselves and state the location where they're tuning in from. And again, that's going to be the city, the county, and the state. There are no preclusions or requirements that you have to be within a certain proximity. One of the earlier versions, there was some talk about being within 100 miles of your community, and that didn't make it into the final version. And then that disclosure will be included in the meeting minutes. So that's something that Yvette's aware of, and she'll make sure. My suggestion was during the roll call vote, when you say present, you just say where you are physically present. So
For the first roll call vote or every roll call vote?
No, just for when they take the attendance roll call vote.
Okay.
So and then from
That would be
starting,
obnoxious.
what's that?
So I was just thinking for every roll call vote, that would be totally obnoxious.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're driving, you have to ping your GPS or something. But and then in 2021, it's going to be virtual meetings will be allowed, but there'll have to be a reason identified. So if there's a continuation of either a local state of emergency, state of emergency, county state of emergency, national state of emergency, whatever that may be, and then individual council members, if they have a health reason, would disclose that, and they could be excused and allowed to participate virtually and vote, whereas previously they would have been allowed to tune in and listen, but they wouldn't have been able to vote or have their presence count towards a quorum. So that's a significant change.
With that, with the last part, does anything have to be proven or, given, like, doctor's note or something? I'm just curious, because it might
No.
not be you per se that has a medical condition, but somebody that you could be living in the household with.
Yeah, I don't, again, I don't think there's any requirement that a doctor's note be provided from my reading of it. Cheryl, did they touch on that at all about, I think it's anything like under family medical that you could claim leave for, you would be entitled to take that, take that and utilize that as your rationale for virtually participating.
I thought I read something, and maybe it was in the interim versions, but I thought that it had to be. At one point, they were talking about having to have it documented, because I was wondering, like, what happens if somebody just has a cold or something, or the flu and wants to participate, and I didn't think that was possible under the new act, because it's not a documented medical condition.
So they just stated, as far as, again, medical condition is the medical condition, from my reading of it, was defined as an injury, illness, disability, or other health related complication. So, and again, I don't think there was any, I don't believe that there's any requirement that they, you have your doctor appear with you that you're in the hospital to substantiate it. So.
Okay, all right. Might have just been one of the interim discussions.
I mean, I do know we have the official call in, give advance notice, right? If you're going to miss a meeting, right? So we're still adhering to that policy.
Yeah, and that's thank you for bringing that up again. So that's something that again, the city is going to do in terms of having a written policy for when to conduct a virtual meeting, how to notify administration that you're going to be, or you intend to be participating virtually. And that's something that I think we're going to be working on here very quickly. Again, most of it is, as you said, is stuff that we're already doing. The notices, the notice requirements, I think the city's already doing that, putting it on their website. Timing wise, I think we're well within the acceptable time limitations for that. So I think it's just going to be putting that policy and what we're doing down in writing, and that's something that council, and that'll be applicable to council, planning commission, any other body of the city that conducts the meeting virtually.
It's now 7 o'clock. Are we ready to end this meeting?
Bruce, can you open your email and see if that's the one you wanted? I think I sent it to.
Yes.
Okay, I sent it to all the council members, Cheryl and Yvette, so.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
Any public comment before we go?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Is there any public comment? Anyone that wants to speak? And if you feel like you're being pressured to speak for a few minutes, you can stay at the next meeting, log into the next meeting, and you would be able to speak at the beginning. Kelda, is there anyone asking a question?
No hands raised.
Thank you. Okay, well then, let's log off to log back in.